Hi everyone. Good afternoon. I trust your day has started off well and your day is going well. My name is Great Namani and I'll be your moderator for today's event. So it's 1st of May and it's May Day. I would love to begin by um, thanking everyone. It's May Day and across Africa, right? We celebrate May Day by appreciating workers. So I would love to, as well, on behalf of AASP, appreciate everyone who is joining the call today, who has been working very hard to contribute to the continent and to, create an Africa that we all desire and we all dream of. So thank you everyone for your contributions. So this is the African Economic Scholars Program annual webinar series. It's the third edition. And just before we kick off, we'd love to know where we're joining from. We want to understand the length and breadth of this webinar. So please, do you mind using the chat box to let us know where you're joining us from? You can start by with your name first and then the city or the country you're joining us from. And if you're a student, also feel free to let us know your university. I believe there will be lots of students joining us today, so it will be cool to all connect and meet people as well in the webinar. So please do use the chat box, let us know your name and where you are joining us from, and probably your university if you are a student. Yeah, I'll keep an eye on the chat box. Hi, Flourish. Flourish is joining from the United Kingdom. Hi, Flourish. Nice to meet you. Thank you for joining. Um, yes, I'm still waiting for more entries from the participants. Um, Hi, Amara. Good to see you from South Africa. Awesome. Hi, Charles, joining from Maiduguri, Nigeria. Awesome. Nice to meet you. Hi, Tobina. Tobina from Abuja, Nigeria. Nice to meet you all. Thank you so much for joining us. Hi, Emeka, joining us from Abuja, Nigeria as well. Awesome. Hi, Oluchi from Abuja, Nigeria. Hi, Joy joining from Lagos. Hi, Chukwudalo joining from Anambra. James from Lagos, Chinedu. Nice to meet you all. Hi, Thabiso. Thabiso was the first participant to join the call. Early bird. Hi, Thabiso, joining from South Africa, Northwest University. Awesome. Hi, Israel from Enugu. Jennifer from Chicago, US. Nice. Godwin from Nigeria. Welcome, everyone. We are so delighted to have you. Thank you so much for joining the session. Thank you so much for joining the call. We still have more participants dropping in their names and their location. Hi, Bismarck from Ghana. Akiton from Nigeria. Thank you. Thank you so much, guys. All right. So just before we delve in, we've got a couple of activities that we would want the participants to engage in as a way to start off. But before we do that, I would love to give a brief overview of the webinar series. So this is the third edition, like I said earlier. And give me a sec. I need to meet somebody. Yes. All right. So this is the third edition, like I said earlier, and we are delighted to this year have Professor Kingsley Moghalu, right, who was the former Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria and currently the founder and president of the Institute for Governance and Economic Transformation, IGET. And also one time the inaugural president, right, of the African School of Governance. It's such an honor to have him on the call. So last year we also had Miss Esther Adegonle, who happens to be one of the directors at DIA. And 2 years ago, we had Aisha Udochi from the US as well, the National Bureau of Statistics US. So it's been an event that brings together young people across Africa who are very interested in economics and who want to, build some experience in the economics in the field of economics, and it's always a good way to learn from the experience of those who have gone ahead of us, build from their mistakes, learn from their exposure, and also better prepare ourselves for our career and our future endeavors. So this year we are excited to have Professor Kingsley Moghalu. Before we go ahead, we'd love to learn about, first of all, how you feel about the session. So I'm going to be sharing some questions with Slido. If you've got your phone, um please, I'm going to be sharing a link on the chat. Let us know how you feel in one word, how you feel about the session. I've just posted a link on the chat. Just click on the link and in one word, tell us how do you feel about the session? Just how do you feel about the session? Just in one word. Yeah, and then continue from there. So I'm going to share my screen and we can all see the word, the word that happens to be the most reoccurring. Nice, excited. Okay, awesome. Ready to learn. Nice. Very educative. Curious. Yeah, I like that. Excited happens to be taking the lead. Um, yeah, just a few more before we go. Curious, enlightening, curious, excited, ready to learn, excited. Nice. Someone said elated in the chat. Nice. Enthusiastic. I like that. Well done, everyone. Um, cool. Active. Okay, we've got one more person chatting, typing. Okay, 13 participants. I mean, there are a lot of us here. There are almost 40 of us on the call. But yeah, that's fine. Okay, two more participants and then we'll call it a day. Okay, more excited, pumped. I like that. I like the pump. Yeah. Awesome, awesome. So thank you very much, everyone. I think we'll just stop here for now, and then we'll have just one more before the session starts proper. Before we move on to the next agenda, I would love to tell us a bit more about AESP and what we do at AESP. So AESP is the African Economic Scholars Program, and the AESP runs a couple of programs annually. One of them happens to be this annual webinar series that we all joined. And alongside this, we also run the Scholars Program, which happens to be our key program, right? This year this year would be the fourth cohort, right? We just wrapped up recruitment for the first cohort, and we're currently reviewing applications. So the Scholars Program is a 10-week series, 10-week session that covers policy and economics. We bring in top students across Africa. Usually, we pegged it to Nigeria, Ghana, South Africa, and Kenya because it was our start, and we wanted to test the waters. But hopefully, from next year, we plan to, spread it to other countries as well, to get students from other countries. But yeah, the Scholars Program happens to be our key program, and we invite speakers for those 10 weeks. The students learn, they read books, they read some resources and materials. We train them on some other skills, CV writing, even scholarships, applications as well. So it's a very wholesome program, and I believe some applicants would be on the call right now as well. And a couple of our scholars are also on the call. It's usually very wholesome. Um, and at the end of the program, we also try to, we've tried to build an alumni community. We have an alumni community made up of scholars from different years, and we try to also kind of build some activities around alumni, having alumni sessions. But most importantly, for some of the scholars, practically the top scholars, we try to also ensure that they earn internships with some think tanks majorly in in Nigeria. We've done that for the past few years now, and it's been very beautiful. We have a couple of our scholars as well who've got scholarships. If you've been following our timelines on social media, you would see some of those updates. So it's really an exciting opportunity. And if you're a student joining us, it will be nice for you to also shoot your application next year when the application opens up. All right. Apart from the Scholars Program, we also organize the National Policy Challenge, which will be running for the third time this year. So for now, it's just restricted to the Nigerian community, right? Because we are starting and we want to test the waters as well and see how far we can go with that first before we move on to other countries. But yeah, the National Policy Challenge is an opportunity for students to write on policy issues, get to present and defend their policy ideas, and earn some reward as well. It's been very beautiful, reading some of the articles and some of the outputs of the policy challenge. And I hope that some students joining us will also write, for the 2026 challenge. And then finally, this year we're hoping to have a physical program and run one or two physical programs and establish ourselves even more in Africa. And I mean, you can follow us on social media. We're on LinkedIn, on Twitter, on X, right? And on Instagram. Follow us there, and you would be updated with all our activities. So at this point, I would love to invite Flourish, Flourish, who would be, telling us a bit more about our speaker today, Professor Kingsley Moghalu. I am very excited and ready to learn, like one of the participants said, ready to learn. And I hope you've got your jotters and your books ready to jot, to note, to learn. Over to you, Flourish.
Thank you very much. Great. And thank you to everyone for joining the third edition of the annual webinar series of the African Economic Scholars Program. We are very, very excited to have you here. And I was one of the people who wrote that. I was very excited as well. So we have Professor Kingsley Moghalu joining us today, and he's going to be speaking on commanding value as an African economist in the global sphere. Professor Kingsley Moghalu is a globally respected political economist with over 30 years of impact in international finance, governance, and development. He's the founder and CEO of Sugato Strategies LLC, and he advises on over $3 billion of investments in emerging markets for some of the largest global institutional investors. He also serves as the president of the Institute for Governance and Economic Transformation, IGET Academy, where he advances governance and economic transformation in developing countries. Professor Moghalu previously served as the deputy governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria, where he led landmark financial reforms and expanded financial inclusion. He also played a key role in building Africa's largest fintech ecosystem, and he has held senior leadership roles at the United Nations and the Global Fund in Geneva, mobilizing over $1 billion in global development finance. In academia, he has taught at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University, and he has held a fellowship at the University of Oxford as well. He holds a PhD from the London School of Economics and also holds executive education from Harvard, Wharton, and Columbia. He was the inaugural president and vice chancellor of the African School of Governance in Rwanda, where he built a Pan African institution from the ground up, managing a $20 million budget and forging global partnerships. As a former Nigerian presidential candidate and an acclaimed author of Emerging Africa, he's a leading global thought whose insights have been featured on platforms such as BBC, CNN, and Bloomberg, shaping conversations on governance and economic transformation worldwide. Distinguished guests and scholars, I would like you to join me and to join us all to welcome Professor Kingsley Moghalu to the stage.
So I'm trying to find him, and I'm sure he told me he was going to be joining by 2 p.m., but I can see he's not here yet. Um, but in the meantime, while I try to reach out to him to be sure that everything is fine, I hope he's not having a technical challenge. Um, we've got just one more poll. I actually missed that, but I'm happy that we get to it eventually. So, one more poll from Slido, and this time around we are going to be asking a very similar question, but also different in a different context. And the question is going to be about also a word cloud, where we get to let understand what you're hoping to gain from the session proper. What are you hoping to gain from the session? Why are you here? Do you want to gain direction? Do you want to get clarity? Um, do you want to learn from mistakes? So I'm also going to be sharing the link as well. Yeah. Yeah. So I'll just share the link. Let us know what exactly you're hoping to learn from the session. Are you hoping to gain clarity, gain direction? Um, Are you hoping to meet people? It's also part of why we are all here, right? Get to network and meet people. Yeah. So let us know why you're here and what you hope to learn. Nice exposure, illumination, networking, mentorship. Nice. Knowledge, insights, directions. Hoping to learn how to be part of commanding value, leadership, mentorship, also all right, thank you very much, guys, for your comments. I just spoke with Professor Kingsley, so apparently he thought it was 2 p.m. US time, and he didn't notice that it was supposed to be 2 p.m. what. So he will join us shortly. But thank you very much for throwing in your comments, hoping to learn how to be part of commanding value, leadership, insights, knowledge, exposure, networking, directions. Awesome. I think whilst we wait for Professor Kingsley to join, I think this would be a good opportunity for us to meet everyone on the call, get to know what we're doing, what we're into. Um, if you're a student, it'd be nice to also meet like other students on the call. So we are going to do an introduction and we are going to use a particular strategy. So the strategy is you will introduce yourself and then you let us know what you do currently, whether you're a student or you're working, and you of course you have to unmute your mic, right? Whether you're a student, whether you're working, and then you throw the baton to someone else. You just randomly pick somebody on the call and make them talk, yeah, drag them to talk. All right, so I think I'm going to start with myself. So my name is Great Namani. I am a master's in economics student at the University of Oxford, a student, and I am keenly interested in macroeconomics development. That is the intersection of macroeconomics and development, and of course policy as well. And happy to be here and happy to eventually meet everyone on the call. So I am going to throw the baton to someone, and then the person gets to throw the baton to somebody else. So I am going to invite Victoria, Victoria Awopeto.
Okay, hi guys. Hello everyone. Excited to be here. My name is Victoria. Victoria Wupet. They can call me Vicky. I'm a young professional because now we have to package this thing. I'm throwing the baton to let me see, passing the baton to whose name is awesome. Yeah. Ada is a good girl.
Nice. Nice to meet you, Victoria. Adeza, can you hear us? Victoria, I think you need to pass the baton to someone else. You have to keep passing the
And
baton.
I'm kind of lost.
Okay, so we are doing an introduction. So you let us know your name and what you do currently. And when you're done, you pass the baton to someone else.
Okay, my
Is it just me or did we lose her? Hi Adeze, we can't hear you.
am currently pursuing my CAN examination, so I'm passing the baton.
Oh dear. Um, I heard her say she's passing the baton to someone. Yeah, I think I'll just pass the baton again to somebody else. So, I'll pass the baton to
Okay,
just.
I think I'm passing the baton to Chinedu Nwafo.
Oh, Chinedu Wafa. Okay, okay.
Hello everyone. I'm Shading for currently working or interning at the Center for the Study of the Economies of Africa, and it interests everyone to know that I earned my internship through the ESP program. I'm emerging the top three scholars. Currently working in the development policy, and particularly in traffic and trade area. So nice to be here. And I'll be passing the baton to um Monachi. Yeah, Monachi. So
Hi everyone. I am Munachi Victor Ifechuku, currently an assistant, a research assistant at the Center for the Studies of the Economies of Africa. Now, who exactly do I hand it over to? I'll hand it to, say, Bismarck. Yeah, Bismarck.
Hello, guys. My name is Bismarck Asumi from Ghana. I'm currently an MPhil economist student at University of Education, Winneba. I'll pass on the baton to Amara Isaac.
Nice.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Amara Isaac, and I'm currently a final year student. I am studying PPE, so that's philosophy, politics, and economics, but I'm majoring in economics. And my interest in economics is international trade and finance and political economy. And at the same time, I'm also serving as the head of policy and research at the International Society of Politics.
All right. Thank you so much, Amara. Thank you so much to everyone who introduced themselves. We are very happy to, hear from you and to learn about you. And we're hoping that we all get to connect after the session. And of course, we should feel free to reach out to one another on LinkedIn, especially people you pass the baton to. If you're not connected to them, it would be nice to, reach out to them after the session. All right. So we have Professor Kingsley already on the call with us. Um, yeah, Professor Kingsley, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you so much. Just before you joined, we had read your bio. Um, so I'll just pass the baton over to you, sir. Thank you so much for joining us. We're very happy to have you.
Thank you. Should I go now?
Yes, please.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay, very good. Well, good morning from here in Washington, D.C., um, and good afternoon, West African time. Thank you for asking me to speak to the African Economic Scholars Program on this very important topic of how African economists can command value in the global sphere. Um, I'm going to start by saying that, economics is obviously a very important profession. It's a social science that studies how wealth and goods are produced, distributed, and consumed. And in doing these things, of course, individuals, businesses, and governments make decisions about how to allocate scarce resources in the face of endless needs or endless wants. For our continent, Africa, we are challenged by poverty and overall development. And so economics matters because it offers a path to the creation of national wealth, which, if we understand it properly and apply it correctly in governance with sound economic management, is a critical path for our continent to make progress going forward. So, for Africa in particular, challenged as we are in terms of wealth and productivity, economics matters because it is one of three major indices of global power. Economic weight is one, military might is another, technological advancement is the third. These are the three major ingredients of global power. And these three factors are all interlinked. And as we discuss how African economists can command value in the global sphere, we must understand that the first rule to creating value by African economists is to understand that economics and economies do not operate in a vacuum. That's the first understanding you have to have if you want to create value. So economic phenomena, to add value, they operate in the context of other factors such as security, factors such as stability, issues of governance. Wealth cannot be created inclusively in an environment that is ravaged by terrorism and broader insecurity. So what appears to be an inability to understand this reality, that economics and economists do not live in a cocoon of solo swan growth models and stochastic models. Many African economists are guilty of intellectual incest. They talk only to themselves, they write only for themselves. And I don't think this is a path to adding value, and as I'll explain later on. So this is why close to a century of the professional study and practice of economics in Africa, the continent is still heavily challenged in terms of development. And questions arise. Do economists matter? Does economics really matter? Of course, your profession matters. But we must admit that in Africa, economics has not led to the kind of transformative impact it has had in the West and in Asia. One of the most important reasons for this is that in the West and Asia, economics has developed alongside and intertwined with technology. Because technology is what influences most industrial productivity. So I'm making the links here so that we can all understand what I'm saying about economics not operating in a vacuum and how you really cannot command value if you don't understand this and apply it in policy. So the West and Asia Economists and economics have gone alongside with technological advancement, which influences industrial productivity. And this is what the wealth of nations of these parts of the world has been based on. It's not based on just economic theories. It's based on the ability to produce and add value efficiently, effectively, innovatively, at less cost with scientific invention and innovation each time. So this is a very important foundation for this conversation. Now, to command value in the global sphere, African economists must first of all establish their value and create value in their home countries in Africa. Again, very important point to make. So, of course, there are other ways to command value, but this point of departure is a critical one. To be influential globally, African economists need to influence structural shifts and outcomes in our continent. So, and then use those kinds of outcomes as, credibly as examples of success. So this proof of concept is one of the major reasons for the rising influence of Asian economists and Asian economies. They can prove their success at home. So the African Economics Studies program should forgive me if I broaden the subject of our discussion beyond seeking global influence and quote-unquote value for African economists. Important as that goal is, and it's important because, quote, the global sphere has significantly shaped economic thinking and economic policy even in our continent. So the topic centers on how African economists can build credibility, influence, and impact in academia, in policy circles, in global institutions. But commanding value implies moving beyond being perceived as regional experts or voices from quote-unquote the developing world to becoming thought leaders in our own right, who shape global economic discourse on an equal footing with economists from anywhere else. And this includes, of course, rigorous original research, influencing bodies like the IMF and the World Bank, and contributing to debates on trade, finance, technology, and development. Let me discuss a number of foundational understandings. In order to achieve this level of influence that we seek and command value and respect globally, African economists need to operate from the standpoint of some of these fundamental understandings that I will point out in a minute. This approach will enable us to come into the stage of global economic thought on our own terms rather than those of others. Some of these understandings we must understand, first of all, tear up the rule books of classical economics. The first understanding that I think we need to have is what I call the fallacy of economic man. I think we all know the economic man theory, Homo economicus. It's a theoretical model in economics that portrays individuals as acting rationally and logically and in a manner that is self-serving, and that therefore creates efficient markets. When they're making economic decisions, they're making the best choices, and that they have access to all the relevant information. And that they process that information in a perfect manner. And it's based on Adam Smith's postulations in The Wealth of Nations, and of course was later formalized by John Stuart Mill in the 19th century. But the truth of the matter is that economic man is it's far more of a theoretical economic modeling approach than it is a dominant fact of real life. Behavioral economics has demonstrated that real human beings do not always act logically in making economic choices and frequently display cognitive biases. If people were so logical, you would not have people immediately their salary rises, they're buying the bigger car in town. That's not logical because you have to operate, what's the logical, economic way to go is that you can restrain yourself for a little while so that you build up savings. But if we follow the economic man theory, that's what you should do. But in reality, a lot of people don't do that. And because a lot of people don't save, they have no money. Thank God for credit in the Western world. Otherwise, there'll be a real crisis in the world. So that's just a humorous way of demonstrating that the economic man theory is not what it's held up to be. The second essential understanding is the understanding that it is I call it the understanding of the primacy of political economy and behavioral economics over theoretical models of economics. Political economy addresses the interaction between political institutions and the political environment on the one hand, and economic systems on the other hand. And political economy holds a very heavy influence over the wealth and poverty of nations. This is another foundational understanding. So you can have all the theories, you can have all the classic economic equations, the actual, influence on how countries progress economically is the intersection of economic factors or patterns and political systems and how politics is organized. And the impact or the interaction of these two things is so if the politics is bad, almost certainly the economy will be bad. Understand this as African economists so that, we have a saying in Africa that he or she who does not know where the rain started beating him or her has very little hope. You have to know where the rain started beating you so that you can actually solve your problem, and you can get the right kind of umbrella to cover yourself. So this understanding is very important for developing countries of Africa, where neither the political systems or the political institutions nor the economic systems are fully developed. So we don't have fully developed political systems. We don't have fully developed economic systems. This is why political economy is the real deal for Africa. Third, the third foundational understanding is that the balance between the state and the market, which is a natural outgrowth of the point I've made above, matters greatly. Classical Western economic thought believes have been erroneously led to believe as well that private capital and the private sector are all that is required to create wealth and achieve prosperity in African countries. I am here to tell you flatly that this is a wrong assumption. The state is essential to drive an economic vision for African countries and to create an enabling environment for private sector wealth creation. Without a capable state, you cannot have strong economic, transformation in any country. And I don't understand why many African economists believe this private sector as the beginning and end thing when you look at the West, when you look at developed countries in Asia, you will see that they all have strong government institutions. They all have strong governance. How then is it that we buy into the notion that all it will take to develop Africa is private capital? Obviously, private capital matters, and we cannot develop without it. But the private sector can never do the work of the state. It is the work of the state to secure you and I, to create security of life and property. That can never be the private sector's job. And without creating that security of life and property, economic activity can never really be sustainable. So this is just the way for us to understand fundamentally where we are making mistakes in the way we think. So it is the combination of the capacity of the state and private capital that creates wealth, the wealth of nations. So, the state has to create an enabling environment, as I was saying, because what happens in many countries on our continent, because the state is weak, but we have a lot of, entrepreneurial people in our countries. There's a lot of dynamism in Africa. People want to create wealth. A lot of businessmen, great ideas, some of them very dominant and doing very well. But what happens in reality is that you have a lot of rent seeking. And a lot of the private sector wealth creation in the continent is extractive. It does not make the life of the average man or woman in our villages better. So it becomes an elite thing. And the Western media and all are glorifying it, but we are not focused on the underlying fundamentals, which is the capacity of the state. So number 4, fundamental, social infrastructure, that is human development indices, such as education for productive knowledge, skills, healthcare, clean water, nutrition, water and sanitation and hygiene, WASH, as we call it. These are the foundations of inclusive growth. And then you back it up with physical infrastructure, such as electricity, roads, railways, waterways. So this is how structural transformation occurs. Human development comes first, and African economists, and all of you should focus first on human development and focus the minds of African policymakers on human development, because without it, all you have is just some shiny object that you call, quote unquote, growth. But it can never bring about. That kind of growth is not inclusive. And so it does not address poverty levels broadly. It does not increase GDP per capita. And it cannot create economic transformation, because it is not growth that creates transformation. It is transformation that creates sustainable growth. So I would put it, first of all, that we chase the kingdom of human development, and all other things will be added onto us. The next thing that will be added is structural transformation. Based on that, we can then have sustainable growth. Because without the kind of skills which education policy can create, you cannot have structural transformation. Because structural transformation is as we know in economics, it's this situation where we move away from a reliance on agriculture or just raw natural commodities as the foundation of the economy, and we go into productivity. But you cannot produce without skills, and you cannot have skills if that is not a focus of the educational system, which is a human development issue. So I just wanted to be clear about that. Fifth, we must not, as African economists, be bound by orthodoxies, such as those promoted by the Bretton Woods institutions. Orthodoxies work where all things are equal, as the economics saying goes, ceteris paribus. But in many developing countries in Africa, all things are not equal. And so these contexts call for very nuanced deviations to suit our context. So, so these are also contexts. There are also contexts where orthodoxies work well. For example, in situations such as monetary policy responses to inflation. I was deputy governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria from 2009 to 2014. And when we came, under the leadership of Governor Sanusi Lamido Sanusi, as he was known at the time, but of course now is the Emir of Kano as Muhammadu Sanusi II. And so we met a very high inflationary environment. We used classical tools of monetary policy, tightening the money supply. I remember one time we raised the interest rate by about 400 basis points, and people screamed. But we had to do that to rein in the money supply, because one of the problems that African economists have and African economies have is that you find that monetary authorities in Africa are increasingly competent, to some degree or to a significant degree independent, but the fiscal side of economic management in Africa remains very weak. The reason for this is that the fiscal side of the economy is managed not rationally, but politically. The fiscal side of many economies in the continent. And therefore, there's a lot of fiscal dominance. And so you have central banks constantly chasing after the politicians, and mopping up their mess. And one of the ways to mop up their mess is through tight monetary policy, because when you're spending so heavily, but not productively, not on the things that actually create wealth. You're spending a lot on salaries, you're spending a lot on contracts and all these kinds of things. There's a lot of loose money sloshing around in the economy, but it's not creating wealth. So if it creates inflation, central banks have to step in and tighten monetary policy rates. So this is one of the areas where we see orthodoxies work, but a lot of times the orthodoxies don't work. And what's the proof of it? One, we had the structural adjustment program. Today, even the IMF and the World Bank have admitted that the structural adjustment programs they proposed and which were used in many African countries were perhaps, in hindsight, not the best thing to do. Because one of the things we know is that those programs cut down social spending. They liberalized economies too quickly. So it led to a deindustrialization of the continent. So we became more financialized. Banks were we know I come from a country where banks are very dominant and make a lot of money, but does this necessarily translate into the economy being transformed or being strong? Not necessarily. So this financialization, which has been the outcome of the structural adjustment program, rather than an industrialization track record or track, we have seen that it has not served Africa very well. Secondly, the IMF and the World Bank have now changed their mind on industrial policy. It used to be the most unpopular thing. Even in this country where I am now, in the United States, they've come back to industrial policy. So we find that some of these orthodoxies, we should not just swallow them. The Washington consensus, the Beijing consensus, and all of these things, we should formulate our own consensus. And we can pick and choose from different consensuses and add our own. And then we come to what works for our own economies. So having set out some of these foundational understandings, let me discuss what I consider to be the pillars of global relevance, commanding value, how African economists can actually command value in the global sphere. So based on the foregoing foundations, I argue that sustainable impact by African economists in the global sphere rests on a number of pillars. One is intellectual independence and rigor. African economists must ground their contributions in deep, original thinking and analysis, rather than repeating donor-friendly frameworks or dependency theories. This means challenging conventional wisdoms, such as a over-reliance on foreign aid. Listen, I was a professor of practice in international business and public policy at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University after I left the central bank. Now, when I was teaching a class, Emerging Africa in the World Economy, which was based on my book, Emerging Africa, How the Global Economy's Last Frontier Can Prosper and Matter, I told my class that I will discuss foreign aid simply out of politeness, not because it matters in my own worldview. Jaws dropped. You can imagine a class of 30 mostly white men and women in graduate school who have been brought up to believe that if you are to discuss Africa and its development, the starting point is a discussion about foreign aid. I told them it is not the starting point. It is the point that we must put behind us if we have to actually develop. They were very surprised with this approach. And so I said to them, listen, I'll just mention it out of politeness, but it's got nothing to do with whether Africa can rise or whether Africa can actually develop. So these are the kind of conventional wisdoms we need to challenge. We have to challenge the conventional wisdom of raw commodity exports. We have to challenge the conventional wisdom of foreign capital without domestic capacity. Foreign investment. Every politician and his uncle in Africa, every female one and their aunt, they're busy crisscrossing the world chasing foreign investment, quote unquote. But foreign investment does not develop any country without the necessary preconditions established by that country itself. So foreign investment does not drive growth. Growth drives foreign investment. I did some research on this, and I found out that this is actually how it works. Especially in the Asian countries, this is what we saw. So if you're talking about foreign investment, but you have not fixed the quote-unquote location factors. In real estate, we talk about location, location, location. What are the location factors for foreign investment to actually, to contribute to economic transformation? The first is that you must have a skilled workforce. The second is that you must have certain types of infrastructure operating in the country, physical infrastructure. So if you have a country that does not have skilled labor, why is it that Boeing would come and establish a manufacturing plant in your country if you do not have people who are trained to put together a Boeing plane? This is the point. And so you find the reason a lot of foreign investment coming into in our continent is very extractive. They're focused mostly on mineral extraction of some sort or the other, or they're focused maybe on agriculture. At some point, they were even trying to buy up a lot of land in Africa to sustain food security in their own countries. So, but the kinds of foreign investment that can actually create transformation is not coming because our governments in our continent, has not done the basics first, and which is the creation of skilled labor, which is a factor of productive knowledge, which is a factor of how the education system is structured, designed, and executed. So this independence of thought, and another popular wisdom is, of course, foreign borrowing. You find a lot of African countries are borrowing so heavily abroad, and they say they're borrowing to construct infrastructure and all of that. But at the end of the day, the revenue, the ratio of revenue to debt service becomes very skewed, and most countries are spending all they earn paying foreign debt. So we should challenge these conventional wisdoms quite strongly. The second pillar is the question of governance and state capacity. These are essential bedrocks for wealth creation in African countries. And so economists who command value, quote unquote, will advocate for and help build effective states in our continent that deliver security, deliver reliable electricity, deliver health services, education, and enabling environments for business. Without this foundation, even brilliant economists will struggle to translate ideas into continental transformation. The third pillar is that an African worldview is essential. Africa's prosperity will require a reinvention of the African mind. Development begins in the mind. Therefore, in my view, development is most importantly a matter of philosophy and psychology. How we think determines how far we go. What is a worldview? A worldview is not about foreign affairs. A worldview is a question of how our mind understands the world around us, where we are coming from, where we're going, how we want to get there as individuals or as countries. What is the value system that governs me as an individual or governs our societies? What is the strategy? What is the theory of knowledge? What's the knowledge system that we use in our societies? What are the building blocks of our worldview? So this question of worldviews was the most important argument I made in my book, Imagine Africa. And I explained it and demonstrated it by showing how the wealth of the West and the wealth of the East was built on vastly different worldviews. But worldviews matter not because they have to be all be the same. They matter because if a society has a collective ambition, a sense of origin and destination, and works consistently in that direction, it is inevitable that development and transformation will occur. So this question of the mind, how we think, is very important. It's not yet an important part of Africa's system of education or even political leadership at this time. Actually, it once was when we were fighting the colonial powers in the 50s and in the 60s. But after that generation of politicians, the generation of politicians we have in Africa today have been influenced a lot by globalization, which, as I argue, yet another conventional wisdom, is overrated. It exists, and it's an important factor of life, but globalization is overrated. The countries that allow themselves to be governed by globalization without having their own agenda inside the globalization end up becoming mere markets for the goods of globalization, but never the factories of globalization. So this worldview is what we now have to internalize in order to command value in the global sphere. And we internalize it by understanding that Africans must shift from a sense of victimhood or external blame and shift to a place of agency. But before I go further, let me demonstrate further what I'm saying. What is the worldview of the West? The Western, earlier than 300-400 years ago, let's say 400 years ago, everybody in the West was poor. They lived in villages. The only people who were wealthy were the kings, princes, the nobility, and some tradesmen, businessmen, and so on and so forth. But most people were not wealthy. What was it that created the wealth, that democratized wealth in the Western world? Scientific invention and innovation. As these things were produced and commercialized, the quality of life improved. When the flushing toilet was invented, people were selling it. Somebody was manufacturing it. Somebody was a middleman. Somebody was a retailer. Somebody invested in the mass production of those things, venture capital. This is how the wealth was created in the Western world. So the worldview of the West is anchored a lot on scientific innovation. It is anchored a lot on the individual freedom, that the government should not be too powerful. It is anchored a lot on institutions that will check the untrammeled power of governments. That's why many of them moved away from monarchies to republican government. So this is the Western worldview. And applying it consistently has created wealth for them. What is the worldview of the East, China and Eastern countries? It's different. It is based on Confucian philosophical principles. So in the East, they don't think first in terms of your individual rights. They think first in terms of your obligations to the community. They think in terms of order, and they think in terms of time as being endless. And that's why the Chinese think in 100-year time spans. Africans think only about today and tomorrow. So you can see, and the consistency with which they apply this worldview to their national governance, to their economic systems, creates also its own transformations. So this matter of worldviews is fundamental. And I believe that African economists need to model the fundamental understandings we're discussing here and project an African model of economics, one that recognizes the community and the society and not just the individual economic man. Because in our cultures, we were very communal. So I think an African worldview has to embrace this reality. An African worldview has to, incorporate of economics the poor and not just the elite. Stakeholder capitalism and not just shareholder capitalism into the global. We have to incorporate these things into the global economic discussion. In the same manner, African economic history, with an emphasis on the workings of the marketplace in historical African society, needs to be retold. Adding such new and hitherto understudied knowledge to global economics discourse would command value. African economists should produce world-class work that addresses Africa's unique contexts, such as demographics, urbanization, critical minerals, green transitions, while contributing universally relevant insights on monetary policy and fiscal systems and industrial policy. Third pillar, I think, structural transformation in Africa, not the hyped Africa rising narratives, should be the focus of African economists. When you speak, when you write, in global forums, in your national forums, focus on human development and structural transformation as the two preconditions for sustainable economic growth. Do not chase the GDP delusion like a lot of governments do. And they spend all their time quoting economic growth figures from the IMF and the World Bank. And at the end of the day, most people in the country are bloody poor. So what do those numbers mean if they're not translating into the lives of ordinary people? So we need to understand that this hype about Africa rising. Now, I'm not saying Africa cannot rise. Of course, Africa can rise. What we're discussing here is how we can rise, but we cannot rise on the basis of somebody else's narrative who says we are rising, but the figures are telling us different things. The figures on life expectancy, the figures on literacy, the figures on health access, the figures on education and skills, the figures on electricity generation. 600 million people in Africa have no electricity. How can you develop in the modern world with that situation? Half of the continent. So when somebody is telling you that Africa is rising, don't swallow these types of things, because sometimes those narratives are created for very specific reasons and to advance agendas that may not necessarily be ours. In the 2000s and the 2010s, the Africa Rising thing, which my book just blew apart, was driven by the facts of the global financial crisis of 2007, 2008, wiped out $14 trillion of economic value, and capital will always look for where to make a profit. So a lot of the Western institutional investors with trillions of money were looking for where to put their money and make decent returns. Now, because Africa had relatively low correlation with the Western world's economies at that time, and returns on investment in Africa tend to be high, average 20 to 30%. So they began to look at Africa as quote unquote the new frontier or the last frontier. And they began to create a narrative to justify these investments. That was the first Africa Rising narrative tsunami. The one you're seeing now is based on critical minerals. They all want the critical minerals. And so another narrative is being created, oh, Africa is rising. I made a post recently in social media about some of these narratives from The Economist and saying, look, I take these things with a pinch of salt. We should be defining our own, narrative and our own ambitions and how to achieve them based on our own agency, So true command of value requires thought leadership and policy advocacy on industrialization and innovation-driven productivity. We know there are many inventors in our continent, young people who produce things, wonderful things, but at the end of the day, those things, we see them in the newspapers, we clap for them, we celebrate them, but nobody invests in those things to turn them into mass-produced goods that we can see on our shelves and in our markets. That's how Western prosperity was built. That's how Chinese prosperity has been built. Why shouldn't we do that in Africa? But because we don't do this, we end up spending time importing other people's products, and we're singing and clapping hallelujah about globalization. But we're victims of it. We're actually not gaining from it. Globalization has winners and losers. It has drivers and passengers. Globalization is not benign, in its intent, and it's not agnostic in its belief. It is an agenda. And that agenda is to use technology to produce things and to diffuse those things into as many global markets as possible and make a profit. Whether it's ideas or culture or technological products, it doesn't matter. So there's a logic to globalization. Now, in the area of Africa, of music and the arts, Africa is doing very well. Our music now is all over worldwide, and yes, we should take pride in that. But that's the soft side of globalization. The hardware of globalization, which determines our ranking on the totem pole, is productivity, the economic productivity. The reason I say this is because Davido is a wonderful singer, and his music moves the world, and so many others. But how many people does Davido employ? This is the question. But if you have industries, they'll employ thousands of people. If somebody's invention becomes mass-produced, it requires an industry to do that. And that employs a lot of people who should have the skills. So let me now talk about practical engagement in terms of commanding value. I would advise you, as young African economists, to build networks, to engage in policy practice beyond the academia, wherever possible, and to communicate effectively across cultures. Apart from publishing in academic journals, publish opinion commentary in influential, popular global media platforms. I call this popularization. I am a great popularizer. As far as I'm concerned, if you are explaining an idea or writing about it and I cannot understand it, like I said, you're just basically committing intellectual incest. You're talking to people like you who are experts, but they don't, they're few. So you must become popularizers. There's a place for intellectual academic discourse, yes, but what actually moves the needle is the popularization of knowledge or the popularization of insight, and this is what young African economists should seek. So publish in leading academic journals, yes, but also publish in non-academic journals, policy journals, popular media, So you should produce work that influences policy at national, regional levels, regional economic communities, the African Union, and at global levels such as the IMF and the World Bank or the G20, yes, but come at it from our own perspective. Another practical point I would say is pursue advanced degrees, masters and PhDs, but complement this with practical experience. At ministries, in think tanks, and in the private sector. This is very, very important so that you combine academic knowledge and insight with an understanding of how the world actually works. Third, I would say that you should develop interdisciplinary skills. This is very important. Combine economics with law, with governance, with geopolitics, with innovation and intellectual property, and with data analytics. This kind of combinations make you stronger. Because I started by saying that one of the weaknesses of the economics profession in the continent is that it is too insular. It assumes that all economies operate perfectly, but it is the combination of laws and economic factors and political things that determine outcomes. Then use digital platforms, but emphasize substance over virility. Then, or virality, sorry. Then mentor peers, build pipelines of rigorous thinkers who can collectively magnify Africa's voice. So these are some of my practical suggestions. I know that there are some challenges. The first challenge, of course, being the fact that commanding value globally comes from commanding value at home or from the situation at home. I've talked about it. Secondly, we have to look at, global spheres because they still have structural biases, in funding, in publishing, and in platforms. And some of these biases require persistent effort, to overcome. So what I want to conclude with is to say that young African economists have an opportunity in the world today that did not exist before. And that opportunity is, the result of technology, the social media, and various ways of diffusion. And I think there should be an intentionality in making use of these platforms to communicate value into the global sphere. But what I don't want you to do, and I that's why I said we have to expand the conversation. It's not just enough for African economists to be seeking global recognition. Global recognition, for it to be sustainable, has to be backed up by transformation on the ground at home. So perhaps that's where our first battle is. It doesn't mean we ignore the global, but what happens globally reflects the realities in localities. That's why Asian economists have increasingly, come to global limelight because they're coming with the example of their continent, their countries rising. And so people take them a lot more seriously. We see people like Jun Chan. We see economists like Justin Yifulin from China. Jun Chan is from South Korea. We see Jagdish Bhagwati from India, and various others. We see Yuan, I think at Johns Hopkins. I'm speaking on Monday and Tuesday. Tuesday, my panel at Harvard Kennedy School. The subject of the Global Empowerment Meeting, GEM 26, is reimagining development. So that's the subject of this conference, and I'm going to be, I happen to be the only African I have seen on all the panels. And so, of course, this is all part of this commanding value in the global sphere. But I will not be saying the things that most of the Western economy. A lot of Nobel laureates are going to be there. The governor of the Reserve, former governor of the Reserve Bank of India, and so on. So what I will be saying will be very different. And the panel I'm speaking on is doing development differently. And I'm going to be saying to them why doing development the way it has been done has actually not yielded the results that we would like to see. And so here is how we need to do it differently. And that begins by ownership. It begins with agency in the minds of the people that everybody is seeking to develop. But if everybody is seeking to develop you, but you're not seeking to develop yourself, and they're seeking to develop you by international development, how can you be developed? Development is a very local thing. It starts from the ground up and it starts in the mind. So on that note, I'd like to conclude, my presentation. I hope it has added value and hopefully will help you command value. Thank you very much.
Oh my, thank you so much, Professor Kingsley. I feel so full. Like my notes are filled. I feel full, and I don't know. I'm just happy that this session is being recorded because it is going to be very, very useful for post the session. Thank you so much for sharing the insights. I don't even know where to start from.
Thank
Just a
you.
few things I would love to highlight that you mentioned that really stood out for me. I love the fact that you gave us a good background. That we're not, it was that background was really necessary for us to really understand where we are coming from and
Yeah,
what the challenges we are facing in Africa. And I also love the fact that you mentioned the Asian miracle, the fact that it wasn't just the World Bank policies or some economic policies, it needed backing, strong governance backing. And while you were speaking, I actually remember something you mentioned in your book that aligns very much well with what you've said, and that was having to take World Bank policies hook, line, and sinker. I remember that in your book, towards the end, last few chapters, you give an instance of when the IMF was asking the central bank governor then to
yeah,
devalue the currency. Yeah, I
mm,
remember devalue the currency, and then he refuted, the suggestion and had to do something different. And
yeah,
it's really kind of and I mean, talk about the fact that a recent World Bank report also had to revisit industrial policy. Their engagement
yes,
with industrial policy, the Financial Times published it. These are some of the issues that some economists actually ignore daily. But I'm happy that you highlighted some of these things. And then talking about worldview, oh my, the first time I read your book, that it was one of the very first things you mentioned at the beginning of the book that stood out for me. It was you mentioned quite early at the book, talking about worldviews and how we need to, build our own worldview as Africans. Very, very important. Thank you so much for the session. I would want to, at this point, give the floor open for questions. I believe we all have questions from the session. Please throw in your question. But just before we take, I mean, if you have a question, please do well to raise your hand and I'll call you to ask the question. But yeah, I also wanted to talk about the book exactly. So I'm going to, while the question session is going on, I'm going to get the link to the book on Amazon. You can buy the book. Fortunately, I got mine as a gift at Lagos Business School, just for you to understand how valuable the book is for Lagos Business School to use it as a gift pack for some of its events. So highly advised to get the book. I'm going to post the Amazon link here on the chat.
yeah. And that's to the Penguin
Okay,
um yeah edition, because that's what people can easily get from Amazon.
okay, I'll get that edition.
Yeah, yeah,
So I'll ask my question, then I'll leave the floor open for other questions. So my
sure.
question is around some of the issues you highlighted towards the end of the session, and even I mean at the onset, and it has to do with, as a young person, how do I strike a balance between having to command value at home and gaining the necessary exposure and experience that I need to garner outside? For instance, since I left Nigeria, I've been asking myself, at what point do I think I'm ready to go back and contribute? At what point do I think that I've learned enough to,
Yeah,
do something back home? It can be very difficult, to strike that balance. And sometimes I
yeah,
wonder, like, I would just wonder what you think about it and how, as young people, we can approach that kind of situation.
absolutely. Very, very pertinent question. We'll take some other questions, maybe another three or four.
Okay.
Yeah, and then I'll take, yeah.
So please, if you got questions, raise your hands. I'm sure you found the session very insightful. If you also want to use the chat box, you can type in your question I will read them out here. Yeah, so the floor is open, everyone. Any takers?
If there are no questions, I'll answer yours.
Yeah, sure.
Maybe some people might be thinking about their question and their comment. So the issue you raised is very important. I myself faced this challenge growing up in my own career. And I started life as a lawyer journalist in Lagos with Newswatch, and I was also a special correspondent for some foreign newspapers at the time. I don't think I want to tell you when this was exactly, otherwise you'll know my age, and then you might get scared. But anyhow, so I said to myself that in order to be able to command value at home, I have to go global. And that's why I presume that many of you are in universities abroad or at home, but you're operating globally. I mean, using technology. Today, global does not mean physically being in the West. Global is now technological. When I was coming of age professionally, global meant a physical relocation and transplantation to the West. So I went to one of the top graduate schools of international affairs at the Fletcher School, and then I joined the United Nations. So I first had an international career, and then as a result of maybe the contributions, but even in that international career, I was still contributing at home, on platforms at home. I was writing in the Guardian newspaper in Nigeria, and so on. So you can actually bridge this gap by, while you're pursuing an international career and publishing on global platforms, divide your time to also impact the national space. Again, like I said, with globalization, this is not now too difficult to do. You see, everybody reads a blog, everybody reads, and it can be read at home, it can be read in Japan, So this is the way to do it. Keep an eye on both constituencies. But after you've acquired a bit of experience, maybe internationally, you should begin to think about home. You should begin to think about home, because if you spend all your life abroad, then you're just giving value to those societies, really. But if you can navigate to find a way to be part of what is happening at home, at some point in your career before you go too far, it's a good thing, because you bring that exposure into your national space. And you will have a lot of authority because you have had global exposure, but you will be able to command value at home, and sometimes even to stand on the national platform to even continue to project value internationally, because people also listen to local constituencies, you see. Yeah. So there's no, I think it's a careful balance, but I think you can manage it. The only thing I would say is don't spend all your life in the West. I would not recommend this to anyone. Especially as economists, I know our countries can be difficult to operate in, because sometimes the governance systems can look as if they're exclusionary. But if you don't work in the government, look for opportunities in the private sector, that is also a place where you can add a lot of value. So that's how I would look at balancing commanding value abroad and globally, and the national space and the local space. Yeah.
Beautiful.
So I see a number of other hands are up. I'll wait for you to recognize them, and then I'll respond.
Yes,
to
thank
their
you very much,
questions.
sir. So
Yeah.
Emmanuel's hand, I saw Emmanuel's hand first. So Emmanuel, please. We'll go just the same way we raised our hands. Emmanuel, Amara, and Janet. Then we'll answer those set of questions first before we come to the rest of questions. Yes, Emmanuel, over to you.
Okay, thanks very much. Please, can you confirm that you can hear me?
Yes, I can
Yes,
hear
very
you.
good.
Okay, great. Prof, I really want to thank you, and I want to thank the organizers of this platform. This is quite intellectual, and at some point, I was missing out due to network or thereof, but I
Oh,
believe
I'm sorry.
yes, please. So, please, Prof, my questions are in twofold. One, toward, towards your discipline as a prof, and the other one, channeling towards you being a former CBN top official. First and foremost, the discipline. As a prof, and with the wealth of knowledge gained within and outside Nigeria, and with the model that you are referring to, both the classical and other models that you have referred to, currently now, to address all these challenges that we are facing, what model has surfaced or is readily at hand that either you or your colleague have been able to champion that has to do with Africa related economic model that can be test run in Africa, unlike we have been test running other models from other from the West. Um, that's one. Two, as a CBN official who was in the aim of authority to address some of the challenges that we face in our economy. What were the what were the reforms that was in place due to your due to you occupying that position and with your other top officials that we can apply with this wealth of knowledge, be it that the government of that time were not able to accept this reform due to one issue or the other. As economists, who will one day, either of us, venture into politics or are in politics, and who will one day be either a CBN governor or a president or a governor in our different states that we can use to model our economic existence so as to bring and add value to either our individual country, Africa, and the world at large. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Emmanuel. Thank you
Okay.
very much for your questions. Also, just before you go on, Amara, just to emphasize that we should keep our questions very short and straight to the point, because of time. Thank you. Over to you, Amara.
Thank you, Great, for the opportunity, and as well as Professor, thank you for the amazing insights. Myself, I'm actually working on my first academic paper where I am looking at quite essentially the topics which we're discussing right now, which my topic in essence is African economy. I'm looking at epistemic justice and political stability. And my question in essence
You're looking at?
the African economies, African epistemic injustice and political stability.
Okay.
And a quote, one thing that you said that really stood out to me was, without a stable state, you will not have a stable economy. And I think that we've seen that throughout most African states where political instability or coups or whatnot leads to economic instability or whatnot. And my question relates a little bit to what Emmanuel had said. And my question goes like this: throughout the African history or since post-colonization, Africa has adopted rather Eurocentric views in their politics and in their economies. So as quote unquote upcoming economists or political economists, as I would like to call myself, what then are structural reforms that we need to now look at in terms of developing Africa to its highest potential? Because another thing you mentioned that really struck out to me was FDIs. It's something that we're focusing now in schools. In my course, and I particularly have an issue with the fact that, as you said, they come from mineral extractions. But then now I wanna argue that we quote unquote need the money for structural investments and whatnot. But then now, where do we strike the balance between accumulating so much FDIs and political instability, and it's not really growing our economy, or in a sense stabilizing it in a broader sense. And my other question would be, sorry, I have two questions. I am a writer. I focus mostly on analytical writing and policy and economic commentary. What then would you say is the limit on how much analytical voice I can give, or where it now becomes, because I have a lot of comments, I'm more analytical in my writing, so I just wanted insight on that. And I guess that's all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Amara.
Okay.
Prof, would you like to take these two questions first, or should we take the third one?
We can take a third one,
All
third
right.
one.
All right, over to you, Jennifer.
Can you hear me?
Yes, please.
Hello, Professor Moghalu. Thank you so much for the insightful session. Thank you, great, for the opportunity as well. So my question is, or maybe one thing that stood out for me was your emphasis that charity begins at home, and also that states and not just private enterprise is critical to economic development. I'm also in the US, and I always look back and I want to contribute to Africa, but African states are known to struggle with inefficiency and corruption, and making it difficult to have sustained reforms, especially from African economists. So my question is, what practices should African economists adopt to effectively influence and improve state capacity, and how do we remain impactful without being constrained by weak institutions? Because whenever I look back, I feel like I can't move the needle. I don't know how to jump into this and where to start exactly. So if you have insights on how we can do this as young economists, I'll be really grateful.
Thank you, Jennifer. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay. The first person talked about what African economic models, and then CBN reforms from our time. Now, the question of African economic models has not been settled. But there are a number of things to look at and to draw from. One of them is African history and African culture. You see, identity is development. You cannot develop outside the context of your identity and your cultures. It doesn't mean that all aspects of our culture are good. There are some that certainly need to be reformed and have been reformed. One of which is the limitations we have had in many African societies about women owning property and owning land, for example. So these are the kinds of cultural reforms that we've had that are good. In many countries now, women can own land, can own property. I remember in Nigeria, there was a decision of the Supreme Court on a case, on this. So when we talk about African models, we should draw from our culture. And one of the areas we can look at is what I was saying, that our societies tend to be communal. We have a susu practices in terms of borrowing and communal lending cooperatives, those types of things, which work. They're not necessarily Western models. We can promote some of these things at the local level, as models to be used, and perhaps encourage investments into these kinds of models in various communities. This is one aspect. The other thing I would say about African models is that we should recognize our context and develop agency around that context. Many of our countries have too many poor people. And so any economics that is not focusing on these poor people, to me, is not an African relevant economics, if you see what I'm trying to say. So in terms of models, again, we can develop human development centered economics that I would call African, not because it is anchored on some ancient thing, but because that's the current reality that is African. So what you define as an African model can be historical, it can be contextual, and it can even be projecting into the future of, for example, Africa's population boom. We all hear the conventional wisdoms. By 2040 or 2050, we'll have 1/4 or 1/3 of the world's employable population because of our youth. By 2100, Africa will be 40% of the world. An African model of economics should interrogate this thing. What does it mean for our societies and for the world for us to continue to have children and then accept a narrative that booming populations automatically work for our benefit? I am not trying to say Africa should be turned into Japan or Italy or those kinds of economies that don't have regenerative, young populations coming up. They are suffering from old age problems. And old age economics is a special type of economics. Go to Japan, you can study it. But in Africa, the whole question of the population, the African model I would recommend for this question, which is very contemporary, is the focus on two things: skilling, productive knowledge, the skilling of the youth, combined with access to finance. So we should be thinking about how a lot of these are and how we should manage our population. I'm not saying control, because control is controversial, but we can manage Africa's population boom so that economic productivity stays ahead of population growth. The first thing we should recognize is that, just uncontrolled population growth for Africa, we should not listen to any narrative that is a good thing. Because if these people are not skilled and they are not employed, you're creating future crisis. In many places, the crisis is already here. In Nigeria, there are 20 million children out of school age. And as our former president Obasanjo likes to say, that's the next generation of Boko Haram. So when we're talking about African models of economics, we're talking about these types of things. I saw somebody put on the platform about African indigenous knowledge systems. I talked about knowledge systems as a very important aspect of worldviews. So we should use African indigenous knowledge as well, for example, in the area of innovation. How can we get our knowledge of herbs and that many Western pharmaceutical companies come and take and go and manufacture the big drugs, and so on? How can we create a scientific verification of African traditional healing and medical systems? How can we standardize our African knowledge? This is a task, and these are the kinds of models that we're talking about. So, and there are various other examples. Talked about CBN reforms from our time. Our time in the central bank, which I'm very proud to have been part of, was phenomenal. It was absolutely phenomenal. By the time we came in 2009, we had the global financial crisis, which impacted the oil price. And so the second round effects were affecting the Nigerian financial system. We had just gone through a consolidation of the banking system that Governor Soludo had initiated in 2005, 2004, 2005. And that, narrowed banks, about 89 banks, into about 24 banks. So that was a very good reform that Soludo did, but there was something missing. And that is that many of these banks they merged in a hurried process, and some of them were not quite as solid internally as they looked outside. So the regulatory system in the Nigerian financial system was not strong, and that's where we came in. Because by the time we came in, about 10 of those banks were in danger of collapsing. So we had to do a lot of reforms. We did, first of all, Sanusi fired about 8 bank CEOs. So we were the first central bank jurisdiction in the world to extract accountability for unethical and corrupt behavior by bankers. That was a major reform. A couple of bank CEOs were sentenced to jail terms. So, because we took the approach, our approach was that the depositor was king, and that no bank would fail and no depositor would lose one kobo. That was the approach we went into our reforms with. And it worked. It stabilized the banking system. I was assigned as Deputy Governor for Financial Stability by the Governor, Sanusi, especially for most of my tenure. So we stabilized the Nigerian banking system by creating as well different tiers of banks. The global banks with a different level of capital, the national banks with a different level of capital, and regional banks, rather than what we met, which was a one-size-fits-all. Everybody had to be a big national bank. And this led to a lot of artificial behavior. If we know everywhere in the world, in America and in Europe, there are small banks that are community banks, then there are big banks. Everybody does not have to be JP Morgan Chase, or Merrill Lynch. So this was another reform that we did. We reformed corporate governance. We reformed risk management in the banking system. And we made sure that banks now included, we adopted an analysis of risk factors as we're looking at banks, not just compliance-based supervision. You see what I'm saying? So we also introduced non-interest banking, Islamic banking. It was a bit controversial, but we were addressing the reality of a very big part of Nigeria, and that many people there didn't trust Western banking systems, and we created a system that they felt comfortable with. And so we improved financial inclusion from about 33% where we found it to about 70% today. We introduced the bank verification number, the BVN. I led the introduction of the BVN into the Nigerian banking system. So this was a major thing that was anti-fraud, and allowed 40 million Nigerians to have unique identification in the banking system, because we were disappointed that the national authorities had not at that time been able to execute a proper national identification scheme. So we said, okay, but we control the financial system. So within that system that we control, we must make sure that there's transparency, So we introduced that, and that BVN, and so we digitalized the payment system by digitalizing the back end, the real-time gross settlement system. And this led to the fintech revolution that we have in Nigeria today. Nigeria has the biggest fintech market in Africa. Value is about at 1.6 trillion as of the last time I checked in a year, in terms of volume and, traded or transacted. Dollars, I mean, yeah. So these are very, very important transformations that our reforms, and there's so many, I can't even, and these reforms remain today. The fact that Nigeria's financial system has remained stable and resilient, despite all the global turbulence, is largely because of the reforms that the Sanusi-led central bank implemented. And I was part of that. So I've given you a few examples. We invested heavily in development finance as our own form of quantitative easing. We were very innovative the way we did quantitative easing. We didn't do it the way the West was doing it. We did it through development finance, to be able to put, money into the economy in a productive way. So many reforms that we did. It was a 5 years of constant reform, but we started with a strategy. We began with the end in mind, and this is what I will always recommend. Begin with the end in mind. Know where you want to arrive at, and start with what will make you get there. So this is it about the CBN reforms. Now, Amara said Africa has adopted Eurocentric models. What structural reforms are essential? The most important structural reforms that we need in Africa are political. They are not economic, strictly. The reason many African economies struggle is because we have not resolved the politics and political succession, transfer of power, democracy. Many African countries today pretend to be practicing democracy, but we're not practicing democracy because the requirements for real democracy do not exist in many African countries. For you to have real democracy, you must first of all have an informed citizenry, which is making choices in an informed manner. Not that they are poor and politicians are giving them money to vote and they're voting because so-and-so gave me 10,000 naira. So this reform in terms of knowledge, Paulo Freire talked about the pedagogy of the oppressed. This is what is operating in many African countries, that the minds of Africans have not yet been conscientized to ask the questions and draw the answers that can truly transform our reality. So we are practicing democracy at a level that is artificial. People are not educated. The electoral umpires are not fair. They are not independent. And so a lot of elections get rigged. These things are influencing the economies of African countries because, first of all, they create instability. When people feel excluded, they fight. When they fight, there's war. And when there's war, economies cannot prosper. So we need, national identity versus extreme senses of regional or sectarian identity. Nationhood has not been created in many African countries. We have countries, but they are not yet nations with a cohesive worldview. You see? So if we solve some of these underlying political problems, and one of the ways we can address it is for economists such as you to make a case about the win-win scenario to politicians. Here is how we can actually all benefit, rather than the politician just thinking about how he or she will benefit. And after my 4 years in power, I'm gone. Others suffer the thing. So African economists need to be very much engaged in the political discussions in our countries by helping our politicians with ideas, popularizing the ideas, and putting pressure on politicians about their accountability and responsibility to take people out of poverty. You can use statistics from other places. So these are some of the structural reforms I believe. I believe a lot of educational structural reform. The education system in many African countries must be totally retooled. You see, I didn't have time to go into it, how East Asia, the East Asian development miracle, how it actually worked. I'll just read a little to you. East Asian youth development models, particularly from the Asian tigers, South Korea, Singapore, Taiwan, and to some extent Japan and China, offer compelling lessons on transforming a large youth population into a driver of rapid economic growth. These models emphasize human capital accumulation through education, skills, discipline, and alignment with national industrial strategies. They powered the East Asian miracle of high growth, industrialization, and poverty reduction from the 1960s to the 1990s onward, often starting from low-income post-war or post-colonial conditions similar to parts of Africa today. And then he went on to describe some very specific, models that Taiwan used, that South Korea used, massive investment. So education, the education system in African countries is the first structural transformation that must take place. Because right now, it's not serving the purpose of development. People go through rote learning, they learn, they write exams, blah, blah, but they're not trained to think originally. And, they're not trained with practical skills. We need to shift our education model away from university education more towards vocational education. I believe that vocational skills should make up 60 to 70% of, post-secondary learning in our countries. We have all these graduates and they're roaming around. They don't have practical knowledge and they can't find jobs. So the advocacy for the transformation of education, I think, is primary. Then the transformation of the political systems to make sure that we have stability so that economies can grow is also primary. These two are the strongest structural recommendations that I think are essential. You asked, what's the limit of your analytical voice? Your analytical voice has no limit. I mean, you can analyze and impact and influence as much as you like. I just say, pick your audience, use your language in a way that it's easy to access the knowledge you're sharing. Go to where the people who make decisions get their information from. Find out what it is. So now, if you think that writing on Twitter will make President Tinubu see your idea, he doesn't look at social media, and he has said it before. So you have to find out how does he absorb information? Does he watch television? Maybe. Most of the older generation do that. So you can find out, you can even research what programs does he like? What newscasters does he like? You can get yourself interviewed on those news shows. And the chances are high that he will hear what you are saying. And you're saying it for the national interest. You're saying, and this applies in many African countries as well. I'm not just talking about Nigeria. So you are making and you're making impact because the people who have power are listening. And you're making it to them in a practical way. It's not necessarily revolutionary. The revolutionary aspect of structural transformation in our countries is for the average voting citizen to execute. It's not for those in diaspora because many of you don't even have voting rights. But you can support candidates who can be transformative in political elections in your countries. And as diaspora, you should be able to take a position. So that's my comment on that. What practices should African economists adopt to influence state capacity? I think I've talked a little bit about this question of security, number one. Many people do not look a lot, and many economists do not do what I would call defense economics or security economics. What do we lose economically by the terrorists' aggressions in the Sahel, for example, by the war in Sudan, the problems in Somalia, the Boko Haram and terrorism in northern Nigeria? When we do economic assessments of farm hours lost, income lost, the consequences of these things, and present it in forums and directly to leaders who have influence, it can help. Many times these things are processes. And that's why organizing yourselves as a group of African Economic Scholars program and coming out with certain statements about how economies in Africa are managed. Let me give you one idea. I have been pushing this idea for a long time, and that is about economic management. If you go to many African, you see, they say, there's an economic team. and that team is led by maybe the Minister of Finance or the Minister of Social, whatever. I was a member of the economic team under President Jonathan. This does not work. Here is how economic management should be organized. Every African president should have a council of economic advisors. They could be 3, they could be 5, they could be 7, it doesn't matter. And they should be full-time, not part-time. You cannot create an economic team full of politicians, full of huge oligarchs, and you say you're serious about managing the economy. This is how economists can be put to good use. And in each economic team, you should have a selection of economic specializations. You should have an agricultural economist. You should have an industrial economist. You should have a labor economist, somebody who's good with economics of labor. You should have a business economist, somebody who has specialized in how to translate economic into the business circles and just the normal business. You should have a fiscal policy expert. You cannot have a monetary policy expert in such a team because monetary policy belongs to the central bank and they're supposed to be independent, but manage the rest. So you put this team of 5 or 6 together and they are full-time. They're monitoring the economy 24/7 and they're advising the president through the chairman on steps that should be taken in every aspect of the economy. Then the president, if he agrees with these suggestions, he then instructs the ministers in those areas to execute. But relying on the ministers who are actually executing programs and, to be the ones who are handling the economy, you will never achieve anything. In Nigeria, when Obasanjo started this practice, it was good because he brought in very competent people. But I recommend this approach that it will actually create even more maximal impact. But after Obasanjo's period, and maybe Jonathan, the quality of these types of arrangements began to go down. And many politicians started trying to find their way. I have to be a member of the economic team. What do you know about how to manage an economy? But you want to be there because the president, you want FaceTime with the president. You want to come and make your PowerPoint presentation about what you have achieved in your area. But this is not how an economy is managed. So you're reducing economic, but you should be more serious about it. So the AESP can actually push these types of advocacies, in a very organized way, with a statement coming from all of you, agreed. In many of these things we've discussed today, do this as an outcome of the 3rd edition and plan strategically where your statements will be directed, where they will be published, what you will say, and the recommendations that you will make. This will become a very important contribution that young African economists have made to their societies, discussing things that are common to many economies in Africa. So, yeah, so these are some of the comments I'll make. I may not have answered every question perfectly, but I hope that, some of these ideas are useful.
Thank you so much, Professor Kingsley. It's been such, this is going to be memorable for most of us, right? I'm looking through the comments and I can see how, at first it seemed like no one had question, and then all of a sudden I saw like 7 hands up. Oh
That's
my
what
God.
always happens. People are shy and then they're waiting for who will break the ice. Yeah.
Yeah, Professor Kingsley, thank you so much for the session. Thank you so much. I've said it before, but I also need to say it again. I'm happy that this session was recorded because I feel like there are also some people out there some young persons out there who need to listen to you speak, who need to listen to some of these ideas you've shared. You've literally touched all facets of, both economic policy, law, different fields actually, and we are very, very thankful for your time. Unfortunately, to some of the participants, we can't take your questions because our time is up. It's already 2 hours. We've been here for, and it felt like we should just go on, go on and on and on. And thank you so much, Prof.
Yeah, before you go, here's one more structural thing I want to say. The judiciary. You see, the judicial system of every country is far more important to the economic development than many people realize. The consistency of the judiciary, the impartiality of the judiciary, the enforcement of laws and contracts is very important for economic development. Accountability. No nation develops without accountability. And accountability is not something that is exacted or enforced by economists. It's enforced by some other parts of the government whose duty it is to do so. Without accountability, no country develops. It is the fear that if I err, I will pay a price that makes people stay in line and organize their societies to be productive and stable. So without addressing these questions of accountability, when we constantly, so African economists should tell Africans that here are our ideas about our economists: accountability, the rule of law, very important. Enforcement of contracts, very important for business environment. Corruption. When you create corruption, it makes business go down, So corruption should be a matter for the margins. You can never wipe it out. Even in advanced countries, you have corruption, Yeah, but it should not be at the center, of our lives in Africa. So there are a number of aspects of commanding value that are very relevant, I think, and good opportunities. Yeah. So continue. Sorry to interrupt.
Thank you. That was crucial. It was very important to point that out. Thank you very much. Thank you. So I would like to hand over to Jennifer, who is the Director of Programs at the African Economic Scholars Program, to give the closing remarks. Over to you, Jennifer.
Yeah.
Hello. Can you please confirm you can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Professor Kingsley Moghalu, for the session. It's been so insightful. I learned a lot. Just like great, I was taking a lot of notes. I think I should turn on my video. Okay.
Good.
Can you see me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, my name is Jennifer Abo, and I'm currently in the US as well. I did a master's in international and development economics at Yale, and currently I'm at the University of Chicago, the Energy Policy Institute. I'm working as a research professional, and soon I'll be starting my PhD. It's been amazing staying on the call. I gained a lot, and I'm sure our participants also gained a lot from this thoughtful session. And we appreciate your time, your commitment to the session, how you answered all the questions in details. We appreciate this, and we look forward to maybe having you come to one of our cohort-based programs in the future. Because in ASP, we have cohort-based programs that happen annually, once a year. We accept about 50 scholars and train them through policy making, inviting experts and facilitators to talk to them. And they also gain technical experience as well, how to communicate, how to write. It's a whole lot. And our next cohort will be starting in June. So also to the people on the call, if you had applied to our programs, to our next upcoming program, applications review has started. So keep an eye out for our emails. We'll be reaching out soon. And in June, we'll be resuming the program for this year. And I would also want to extend our sincere appreciation to the AESP team, my co-directors that made this possible. A lot of intentional effort goes into preparing this kind of sessions and inviting a whole Professor Kingsley Moghalu to the session. Believe me, it was a lot of work. and trying to like communicate, keep in touch, joining a lot of pieces together. We couldn't have done it without them. I'm appreciating the team. Thank you so much. Without taking so much time, I'll bring this to an end. Follow us on social media. Our most active platform is our LinkedIn. So please follow us on LinkedIn. Keep in touch. Also send us emails if you have questions. We're always happy to answer. And if you want to like get in touch with any of us personally, we're also on LinkedIn. You can reach out to me, Great, or anybody on the team. And we are really happy to have you here. And I hope you have a good day, good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. So yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's been a great pleasure for me to be with all of you. Yeah, and thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you so much.
All right. All the best. Take
Thank you,
good care.
Professor Kingsley.
Yeah.
Thank you for your time.
Okay. All right. Okay. Bye now.
All the
Yeah.
best, everyone.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Bye,
Bye.
everyone. Please don't forget to click on the link to purchase the
Thank
book. I've
you.
just reshared the
Thank
form,
you.
the link
Yes.
to the book, and you can also
Buy the
fill our
book.
feedback form.
Buy the book. I got it as a gift when I was at the University of Nigeria.
Oh my
Do
God.
you
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
very, very valuable. Like, I still have my
Yeah.
copy.
Okay. Oh,
I still
okay.
have
I see.
it.
All right.
Quite detailed.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you
Yeah.
so much.
Yeah.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Please, can we get the recording after this? Kindly.
Okay, we'll try and circulate the recording since we have the email addresses. If you don't receive it, please feel free to send us an email, and we'll also send you the link directly. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Lillian.
Thank you very much. Hi, Great. Hi, Jennifer.
Hello.